Have you ever loved someone but were afraid to get close to them? Or have you ever felt that someone cared about you but always kept an invisible distance? Hello, I am Jim Rohn, and today I will tell you a story. A story that is not just about love but also delves deep into the human psyche. This is a story about people who long for connection but unconsciously push others away. People who love with all their hearts but do not know how to hold on to the ones they love. And perhaps you might see yourself in this story. Don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because this story might help you understand yourself better, and maybe it is exactly what you need. Listen and feel. Let's begin. Some people love in silence. They do not speak, do not hold on, do not plead. They simply stand there, watching the ones they love walk away, even though their hearts long to run after them until they are utterly exhausted. Ethan was that kind of person. He was not indifferent, nor was he incapable of love. But he loved in a way that no one could fully grasp, a love full of contradictions, both close and distant, both intense and cold. Claire once thought that love could change Ethan, that if she was patient enough, sincere enough, he would open his heart. But some people do not leave because they do not love. They leave because they fear loving too much. And that was their story. A beautiful yet unfinished love, full of longing but also full of escape. A story that might be your own. So what made Ethan walk away? And did he ever think about coming back? New York, winter of 2019. Claire sat quietly by the window of a small cafe in Brooklyn, her fingers tracing meaningless patterns on the icy glass. Snow was falling outside, covering the old streets in white. She looked down at her phone. No messages from Ethan, no calls, nothing. For 3 years, Ethan had been a mystery she could never quite reach. They met at an art exhibition. He stood in a corner, his deep eyes holding some kind of sadness. When she approached him, he smiled, but his gaze still carried an invisible distance. They loved each other, in their own way. Claire wanted long, late-night conversations, wanted to travel with Ethan, wanted to know about his past. But Ethan always stopped just before things became too deep. Every time she got close, he took a step back. She could feel love in the way he looked at her, in the way he held her hand without saying a word, in the nights he held her tightly when he thought she was asleep. But when she needed affirmation, commitment, something certain, he remained silent. "Do you love me, Ethan?" He did not answer. His hands trembled, unable to face that question. To him, it felt like an invisible chain, not because he did not love her, but because he did not know how to say it without feeling afraid. And then one day, Ethan disappeared. No messages, no goodbyes, just a silent void. Claire did not search for him. She understood. 3 years later, Claire stood in an art gallery in Manhattan. Across the room, she saw a familiar figure. Ethan. The same eyes, the same rough hands she had once held, the same faint smile, as if he was there but never truly belonged. She walked toward him, slowly. "Hello, Ethan." He turned around, and for a moment she saw a glimmer in his eyes, but then, as always, it faded away. "Claire?" His voice was a whisper, as if speaking any louder would shatter everything. She smiled, no longer expecting anything. "I used to think that if I loved you enough, you would stay." She paused, taking a deep breath. "But now I understand. You don't know how." Ethan clenched his hands in his coat pockets. He wanted to say something, but no words came out. She smiled faintly, nodded, and turned away. And this time, Ethan stood still, watching her walk away, still loving her, but unable to keep her. You see, avoidant people are not truly emotionless. They love in their own way, but sometimes that love is never enough to hold on to someone. 1. In existential philosophy, Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Hell is other people, not because they are evil, but because their presence forces us to confront ourselves, our deepest fears, and our own vulnerability." For those with avoidant tendencies, connection is not merely about closeness, it is a risk. A risk of being hurt, a risk of losing autonomy, a risk of having to change for someone else. And so they choose solitude, not because they do not long for love, but because love comes with too great a cost. Ethan was such a person. He did not walk away from Claire because he did not love her. On the contrary, he loved her so much that his love became a threat. In Claire's arms, he felt safe, but he also felt more vulnerable than ever. Her closeness stripped away the walls he had built over the years, and that was not something easy to accept for someone accustomed to controlling their emotions. Existential philosophy suggests that humans are always torn between two choices: absolute freedom and connection with others. When we choose freedom, we can control our own lives, but we are also alone. When we choose connection, we may find love, but at the same time we lose a part of ourselves. Or at least, that was the fear Ethan carried. Perhaps Ethan had once wanted to change. The long nights he held Claire tightly in his arms, the moments he looked at her as if she was his entire world, all were proof that he wanted to stay. But every time his emotions surged, his rational mind warned him that this love could take away the most precious thing he had: absolute independence. Ethan did not hate Claire. He hated himself for not being able to love her the way she deserved, and so he chose the easier path, leaving before he could be left behind. But the biggest question remains: was the solitude Ethan chose truly freedom, or just another prison of his own making? 2. Sociology. The influence of culture and environment on avoidant psychology. Each culture has a different perspective on connection in relationships. In the West, where individualism is highly valued, an independent person who does not rely too much on others may be seen as strong and self-sufficient. Meanwhile, in the East, especially in societies influenced by Confucianism, individuals are often defined by their relationships with family and the community. In such societies, avoiding emotions or maintaining distance in relationships may be perceived as irresponsible or indifferent. Ethan, born and raised in a Western society, did not feel the need to explain to Claire why he kept his distance. He had learned that emotions are not always meant to be expressed, and that a man could choose solitude without being deemed wrong. In Western psychology, particularly in modern mental health philosophies, prioritizing oneself and protecting personal space is considered an essential part of individual growth. But for Claire, or anyone who values deep emotional connection, Ethan's silence was not just self-preservation, but a form of rejection. On the other hand, if Ethan were placed in an Eastern culture, his story might be perceived very differently. In collectivist societies, a man cannot simply live according to his own emotions without considering his impact on others. Confucian teachings emphasize self-cultivation, family regulation, governance of the state, and world peace, meaning that a person must first learn to regulate themselves in order to harmonize with family and society. Someone like Ethan, who avoids emotions, might be seen as emotionally immature or even irresponsible toward the person he loves. In these cultures, sacrifice for others is a crucial value, and ideal love is often associated with dedication, connection, and a willingness to change for one another. However, whether in the East or the West, religious beliefs also play a significant role in how people approach love and relationships. In the West, particularly in Christian traditions, love is often accompanied by devotion, with the belief that love can redeem a person. Classic stories such as Romeo and Juliet or The Great Gatsby convey the message that love is something worth sacrificing for, even at the cost of suffering or life itself. But Ethan was not Gatsby, and he did not believe that love could change him. He believed that he could only be himself when he was not bound by anyone else. Meanwhile, in many Eastern religions and philosophies such as Buddhism, love can be viewed differently, not as possession but as detachment. In this context, someone like Ethan might be seen as practicing non-attachment, a way to avoid suffering by not clinging too deeply to emotions. But this also raises a significant question. Was he truly letting go, or was he merely running away? Society and culture shape how people perceive love, but ultimately each individual must confront themselves. Ethan may have grown up in an environment where maintaining distance was considered normal, but that does not mean he did not feel empty watching Claire walk away. Claire may have believed that love is about connection, but that does not mean she could hold on to someone forever. And so, their story is not just a story of two individuals, but also a story of the values they were raised with, the beliefs they carried, and how the world around them shaped their psychology. But in the end, the most important question remains: can love transcend these differences, or is it forever a struggle between individuality and collectivism, between freedom and connection? 3. Behavioral economics. The reason they invest less in emotions. In behavioral economics, people do not always make decisions with absolute rationality. Instead, they often rely on emotions and their subjective perception of risk. When it comes to relationships, especially love, avoidant individuals tend to act like cautious investors. They carefully weigh the emotional costs against the benefits of connection, and if they perceive the risk is too great, they withdraw before losing too much. Ethan was exactly this type of person. To him, love was not just an emotion but also a trade-off. If he opened his heart to Claire, if he bet on this relationship, he would have to face uncertainties he could not control, arguments, emotional dependency, and the risk of loss. But if he walked away, he could maintain mental stability, avoiding the pain of being hurt or hurting someone else. From a behavioral economics perspective, avoidant individuals often fall into the loss aversion bias. According to this theory, people tend to fear loss more than they desire to gain something. For Ethan, losing his independence or confronting deep emotions was a far greater loss than the joy love could bring. Therefore, he chose to invest as little as possible in emotions, not too deep, not too attached, always keeping a safe exit route. This also explains why people like Ethan tend to ghost, disappear suddenly, or maintain distance in relationships. Instead of facing a difficult conversation or a clear ending, they opt for silence and withdrawal because it requires less emotional cost. A breakup could lead to tears, anger, or guilt, things Ethan wanted to avoid at all costs. But there is a paradox here. No matter how much they avoid emotions, they can never completely escape them. By investing less in love, they also limit their own opportunities for true connection. Ethan might believe he was optimizing his life by withdrawing, but when he watched Claire walk away, when the long nights grew quieter, did he ever wonder, had he truly gained the best outcome? Or was he merely avoiding loss? Ethan is not the only one who runs from love. Perhaps there is a part of him in all of us. We crave connection but fear being hurt. We want to love but also want to control our emotions. Culture, environment, and even survival instincts shape how we approach relationships. But ultimately, only we can decide. Is love worth the risk? If you have ever been in a relationship where one person kept their distance, or if you yourself tend to be avoidant, remember this: love is not just an emotion, it is a choice. Only by daring to step past fear do we truly have the chance to love and be loved fully. What do you think about this story? Have you ever met an Ethan in your life? Leave a comment and share your thoughts. I'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss more insightful stories about psychology and love. Thank you for watching and see you in the next content.